Hello and welcome to this short LinkedIn Live where I'm Mary Maguire and I'm going to share with you some of the challenges and the issues I see my clients experiencing with the diversity data gap. So what do I mean by that? Well, we have lots of ways we can collect data from our employees around their diversity characteristics, but the majority of it, certainly in the UK, is voluntary. In certain parts of Europe, actually, we're not even allowed to ask for this diversity data. So it's a very mixed bag in terms of what data is available, how we collect it. And then the other challenge that I'm seeing organisations have as they're trying to develop their diversity and inclusion strategies to work out the ways to actually support underrepresented groups is that they just don't have enough data. So this is a issue that we're seeing across the board. So today's presentation is just going to go through what is this about and what do we do about it. Now, if you are joining me live, please do use the comments function below and I will gladly come back to you and share some of the thoughts or answer your questions. So thank you very much for that. And the other thing is, most of you will know me. I'm the founder of Agents to Change, which has been helping organisations build inclusive culture since 2006. I'm the author of a number of books, including The Female Edge and, of course, The Inclusion Edge. So let's talk about data. So I'll shorten things to EDI. In terms of my way of describing things, that means equity, diversity and inclusion. Sometimes it's said as DE&I, same thing, diversity, equity and inclusion. And also there's diversity, inclusion and belonging, DIBS. So there's many ways we call this, but in the round, this is about how we make sure we have more equal and inclusive workplaces for everyone that comes to work for us. The challenge is, how do we make sure that our EDI and strategies have the data that they need to measure their effectiveness if we're not able to collect that data because there's a challenge? So what I want to do in this session is just look at what is happening, why are there challenges existing and what can be done about them. But let's start with the legal requirements. So the Equality Act 2010 outlined a number of protected characteristics that employers had to ensure that they addressed in the way that they recruited people, the way that they trained them, the way that they paid them, and the way that they accelerated their career and their opportunities in the organisation. And these included age, disability, gender reassignment, marriage, civil partnership status, and that would include things like pregnancy and maternity or parental status, we talk about more now, race, religion or belief, sex and sexual orientation. What that means is that organisations need to ensure that there isn't discrimination for anyone who sits in them protected classes, but also they need to ensure that their processes and their procedures are being equal in their treatment of people and not creating invisible or inherent barriers in their experiences, which can be hard to do. So the other things that are happening is the other legal requirements is that we already have, I think from 2017, the gender pay gap reporting requirements in the UK. They are also in Ireland. They came in a year or two later in Ireland. Across Europe, they also have similar gender pay reporting requirements. It differs by country, but it's very similar across Europe. And that allows organisations to declare their gender pay based on male and female workers. And what they do is they take a snapshot in time at a certain point through the year when they do their returns that shows what's the average pay for their male workers across different levels in the organisation versus their female workers, and whether that then reports a gap. That's been going now for quite a few years and has been successful in highlighting the issues and the concerns around gender discrimination or undervaluing women in certain roles. And certainly that gap is closing. In terms of the gender pay, slowly, for lots of reasons. They're not just purely to do with pay procedures and pay processes, they're also to do with overall representation and the underrepresentation of women in certain groups, such as technology groups, science groups, engineering and maths, the STEM, including a number of others as well. But it has helped to understand how we use data to drive an issue, identify an issue, and then address it. And the breaking news is that the new government that has just been elected in the UK, the Labour government, have just announced that they're going to extend that pay gap reporting requirement to race and disability as well. So that makes quite a change in terms of how people will start to experience and see the need for data. And some of that data is not collected as a matter of course now. Gender is, obviously age is, and things like citizen status is, but we have lots of things that we don't collect as a matter of course in our processes, and that will then force the agenda of how we start to collect this data in a meaningful way and have it locked into the reporting systems we have, so we can do our annual returns for things like pay gap reporting, but also do a whole host of things which I'll share with you. And I am just going to get myself a drink because I brought some with me and then I forgot to pour it, so just give myself a refreshment here. That's how you know it's live. Right, diversity data life cycle. So if you think about what's happening, sorry about this strange formatting when I put it onto my live stream, it changes slightly, is if we look at the top level of this, we have the inputs. So the inputs of where we get the data from include our recruitment and our application processes. That tends to be one of the biggest places we collect data. And from that, at the moment, we collect the fairly standard stuff, which would be gender, age. We don't, as a matter of course, collect race or ethnicity. We don't collect disability as a matter of course. And we don't collect things like sexual orientation or LGBT plus status as well. So what happens is most recruitment processes have a equal opportunity monitoring form, and that's actually done separately, and it's not locked into the recruitment process. But more and more organisations are finding they need to mature their processes and lock that in a meaningful way. The other things we have are engagement surveys. Almost all organisations, even small ones now, have at least an annual survey, some more, some less, but a regular pulse survey, if you like, which is checking with employees how they're feeling about their time in the organisation and whether they're feeling supported. The other things we're seeing more and more organisations doing is additional very specific surveys which are to do with self-identification of diversity characteristics. So that's a little bit like an equal opportunities monitoring form, but this one is the organisation collecting it, and that information then being stored in the HR system. And then there's other surveys that might be used at different times through the year, which also can collect the data. So many ways we have of collecting the data. What we're finding is organisations are seeing the value now of having their HR information system, their HRIS, as their point of truth, their single point of truth in terms of their data. So that means locking in these diversity characteristics into the HR system in a way that hitherto hasn't happened. And that provides huge amount of opportunities, but also some challenges as well. And as I see, if we have organisations, and many of my clients are like this, which are pan-European or worldwide, there's different requirements in different countries about what is allowed to be collected and how it's allowed to be collected and stored. So we have them other requirements about how do we make things relevant and legal across all of our different jurisdictions, but still collect the data that's very valuable from an ED&I perspective. So we collect the data, we lock it into our HRIS system, and then we have various things that come out of that. Just excuse me. I can hear my throat's getting a bit dry. So that includes dashboards. Reporting and dashboards are very common for many organisations now. And then dashboards include a number of things of HR data in terms of things like headcount and turnover and leavers and joiners, people who have been promoted. It might also lock in things like engagement scores and other things to give real insights into the overall picture of the employee population. And more they're also joining in with ED&I data, so that would be race data, ethnicity data, gender data, in a way that actually shows and cuts it in a way that says, are we seeing equal opportunities? Are we seeing equal abilities to progress across different diversity traits? And we also have various things going on. Almost all organisations I work with have some sort of DE&I or ED&I strategy. And as a result of that, they set priorities and initiatives throughout the year, and they refresh that every year. And then, of course, there's the employee population themselves and how they're looked after. And there's a range of engagement and community activities that happen throughout the year. Some of them might be linked to ED&I work, or some of it might be just to do with general engagement, celebration, and motivation and team building throughout the year. So there are various things that are happening that this data might help to plan and define. So as far as the data landscape is, rich opportunities, rich ways of collecting the data, rich ways of using the data. But what we're finding is that doesn't lead automatically to high levels of declaration from your employees, which is an interesting thing. You'd have to say, well, why is that? What's going on that we're not getting the information that we need? I think what we found is that when it becomes legislation, so it's interesting, the new government have just made this something they're going to lock into legislation very quickly, which is that they're going to have pay gap reporting requirements that extends now to race, ethnicity, and also disability, because that helps to highlight inequalities. And as I said, that while we haven't closed the gap, because there's many reasons why we have a pay gap for gender, it has helped to highlight it and give organisations a certain lens to look at these issues. So extending it, I think, is a very positive thing, but it brings its challenges. So understanding factors such as disability, LGBT status, ethnicity, and so on, having that data locked into your overall database allows you to cut data in certain ways. It asks you to allow it to raise deeper questions and maybe look at whether this data is showing a story or a picture that maybe you weren't aware of. So it can be really, really valuable. And what we found is that allows organisations to think about what we'd call about equity initiatives. So what we mean by equity is not everyone starts a process in exactly the same place for a variety of reasons. They may not be able to fully involve themselves in a process because they have some sort of disability and they need some assistance with that, or they may be from an underrepresented group, which we know then has some sort of issues around either confidence or behaviours that make it difficult for them to fully involve themselves into a process. So we look at targeting certain groups, targeting recruitment, targeting development in a way that helps address what we are seeing as known barriers to underrepresented groups, to give them an opportunity that maybe without them targeted opportunities they wouldn't get to. So the data helps us to target. And what we know is that we can enhance, increase, improve the effectiveness of recruitment, engagement, and succession processes through using a diversity lens as well. So increasing disclosure rates, sorry about the black box that says trust, but sometimes pictures don't always feed through here. So trust, building trust. If we think about trust and what that means, is there's three areas to it. So one of them is the promise. So trust always starts with a promise of something. So whether that's a promise of standards or a promise of performance if it's a product, or a promise of services, or a promise of processes being reliable in the people follow them. So whatever it is, there's a promise that you will get something that you can see will deliver something in a certain way. The second thing is that being delivered consistently. So the consistency of the promise is essential to building trust. And then the third one is that the recipient of that promise feels the benefits of it. So there's something that they get from it that they feel they wouldn't have got elsewhere. So brand promises are very like this. Certain brands promise things. Tesla would be an example, where they promise a high performance electrical vehicle that will be reliable every time they go in the car, and that delivers benefits to the driver in terms of the technology and the benefits of driving the car. And we can see that in the way that as organisations that have a emotional and a psychological contract with their employees, the more that they can consistently deliver the promise of what it would be like to work with us, what our values are, how you'll see our values, the more that employees build their trust in that organisation. And what I'm finding is that that understanding of that element of trust is often missing in the way that organisations go about collecting the data. So taking a perspective of this, employees, when they're being asked for data, which is sometimes highly personal data that they wouldn't share naturally with somebody in the street, for example, in a casual conversation, feels challenging for them to disclose in certain situations with their employers. So you need to think about what they want to know is why you want this data. I haven't put that in. Why would you be asking me about my LGBT status, or whether I have a hidden disability, or my ethnicity? And who will access it? Will my immediate line manager know about certain things that I disclose to you that maybe I wouldn't have disclosed naturally to this person? And what is the benefit to me? Why would I want to choose to give something to you which I consider either intimate or personal details in my life that I wouldn't disclose to you in a team meeting, for example? So what would be the benefit for me in doing so? So often employees have a lot of concerns when they're being asked for this data. Now, organisations, when they're collecting the data, and I've seen this again and again in conversations, is they are emphasising the importance of that data to their strategies and their processes and their priorities. And then what they're doing is they're using that data to report back to senior managers. And if you just look at them two columns, you can see a big disparity between how employers are seeing the data and how employees are. And that's probably why I'm seeing many organisations that I'm working with that are having a disclosure rate of somewhere between 20 and 40% for the additional diversity characteristics they're trying to collect. So we need to think about how can we evolve the way that we collect data, and how can we build the trust in our employees in what that data is about and what they can expect from it. Now, the first thing, and I'm often talking to my clients about this, is an EDI data policy that's accessible to all staff. Now, when I talk about this, what I hear back is, "Oh yes, but we've got a GDPR policy, and we've got a data protection policy, so we've covered all of that." And I say, well, yes and no. What that does is it tells people and gives people reassurances that the general data that's held in the context of their employment is held securely and is only accessed by a certain number of people and is only accessed for certain reasons. And that's great. But when we're going into EDI data, because we are collecting data which has more personal resonance to the individual, we really need to think about telling a more coherent story back to our staff about why that data is going to be collected and how it's going to be used. So an EDI data policy is very much talking about what this data is about, how we'll collect it, how you'll see the transparency of that data, but also how we'll respect you as the individual and your attributes won't be shared widely. Now, that may be obvious things to be talking about, but it's amazing how many people assume that their overall data privacy policy is enough. And I don't believe it is. I think that you need to think about this as a separate, in addition, it's a layered approach in addition to what you already have, and make that very accessible and very much in employee speak, so a much more easily understood and consumed policy for people to read. And then you've probably got this, many organisations have, but again, it's amazing how important this is setting up strong security protocols for the HRIS system you use, so your point of truth database, for who sees things like diversity attributes. There may be many things that, for example, a line manager of an employee needs to see, but there may be other things that they don't. So you need to think about who sees these and for what reason. If it's something that's automatically put on somebody's public profile, that would make them extremely uncomfortable. But similarly, if it's actually put into places where, for example, things like performance reviews and appraisals are done and decisions around pay and succession are done, employees may also feel equally uncomfortable. So you need to think about, well, what do we need to put in as additional layers of security to make sure that data is used by the right people in the right way? And again, that would be fed into the EDI data policy as well. And I think that one of the things that I see is often missing, as I said when I shared you the previous slide, is organisations tend to focus on their needs for the data and then reporting that data to the very senior leaders, or certainly to a very high level in the organisation of leaders, of what that data means. But as I said, building trust involves not only consistency of the promise, but also understanding the benefits. So your employees need to see them diversity data insights on a regular basis, perhaps alongside things like your engagement survey results, which often organisations share back in some form. And that needs to be something that's happening not just once every year or every 2 years, and also not relying on whatever your public reports are, like your gender pay report or your ED&I or DE&I public report that goes out to people. Your employees need to have something that's an internal cadence of communication, which is sharing the insights that this diversity data brings in a way that's meaningful to them, because that's the third element of trust, them seeing the benefits. And what I'd be suggesting is that probably that needs to be something like quarterly. So could it be a version of EDI dashboard, or a version of it that has been tailored for your employee population, which is showing examples of how the diversity data has led to inclusion benefits and changes to policies or processes as a result? And that's the way that we start over time to increase the disclosure rates for our employees. So we also know, and these are probably things you're already aware of, but I thought they were worth pointing out, now we need to think about for you see the data, but also how you explain that data value to your employees. We certainly know it leads to fairer recruitment. So what we found is that by having regular dashboards which actually look at, from a diversity lens, at the way we recruit people, the way that our pipelines of potential candidates are brought in, the shortlisting process that we have, and therefore the diversity of the candidates that finally get interviewed and recruited, helps us to see if there is things like bias in our recruitment process that we hadn't seen before, and address it. We also see it brings more transparency for things like promotion and succession processes, because it raises the questions of, are we promoting people with some inherent bias around race, around gender, around ability or disability that we haven't considered before? We see that putting more emphasis on ED&I just generally leads to more inclusive cultures. So what we're seeing is that the investment in things like employee networks and the celebration of cultural events helps all employees to feel more reassured, more confident that the organisation is taking these things seriously. And if they're things that reflect their own identity traits, then that actually gives them more confidence about why they disclose that data. We also know it helps to target training in certain ways. So we know where we've got barriers around equity, for example, female or ethnic minority leaders. We can create targeted training to help to address that. And we also know, and there's much research out there around this, is that more inclusive cultures lead to improved employee motivation and therefore retention and engagement, which all adds to better performance and lower costs since you don't have higher turnover. So there's lots of reasons why we want that data, and where it actually brings benefits if we can actually increase the trust and the disclosure rates of our employees. So that's what I wanted to cover today. I hope you found that useful. And as I said, if you're looking at this after the event and you've got some comments or questions, by all means, either put them in the comment thread below where you're viewing this, or you can get in touch with me as well. So in summary, we know that the imperative to collect robust and reliable diversity data is increasing, and the new legislation coming in the UK will definitely accelerate that. But we also know we need to think about collecting data sensitively and in a way that reassures and improves the trust with our employees about how that data will be collected, used and accessed. And recognising that it takes time, this takes a number of loops of collection to increase disclosure rates. I think that's fine. I think that the more we do it and the more we report back, the higher that goes. And I've seen that time and again. But making sure that you invest in a communication loop that means that the data isn't collected and only seen by a smaller number of decision makers, but actually shared appropriately more widely in the organisation. So I hope you found that useful. Thank you very much for your time today. If you've got any questions or you want to know any more, you can contact me at mary@agents2change.com. And if you'd like more information about my book, The Inclusion Edge, if you'd like a free chapter of that to see if it's something that would be of value to you, send me an email and I'd be more than happy to help. Thank you very much for your time. Thank you for the opportunity to share that with you, and thanks for the comments, Daniela. Thank you for that. I hope you've found that useful, and everyone else is listening, thank you very much, and I'm wishing you a great day. Thank you. Take care.